and thank you for joining us. Leading today's discussion, I'd like to introduce Nicholas Johnson, Chief Evangelist at Kahua. Nicholas has served the design and construction industry for 40 plus years. Starting his career as an electrical designer and drafter, he was among the first to create a career around CAD/CAM technology. When working in IT for Atlanta-based Heery International, Nicholas learned about construction project management software and startup company Constructware before they were acquired by Autodesk. Since then, he's held sales leadership positions at Autodesk, Trimble, Connected Water, Beck Technologies, and Trimble eBuilder. We also have a great panel of experts who will be joining Nicholas today, and we'll learn more about them in just a minute. The panel will take questions at the end of the discussion, and so don't forget to submit your questions in the Q&A section of the webinar console throughout today's presentation.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate that very generous and gracious introduction. Let me tell you all a little bit about Kahua before we begin. We are, of course, a leading PMIS or Project Management Information System provider. But specifically, we created the world's only low-code application platform built specifically for the complexity of the design and construction industry, and an ever-growing ecosystem of partner companies providing services and application enhancements. Providing purpose-built solutions is what we do, specifically for contractors, their subcontractors, construction owners of various types from healthcare to government, K-12 and universities, transportation, utilities, and more. We provide the ability for each stakeholder to own and maintain all the data they create on any project without having to recreate it in another stakeholder's database. We provide unmatched security as the only cloud service in the construction industry to achieve FedRAMP authorization for our full suite of solutions. And today we introduce to you the value of Asset Centric Project Management, a methodology that I'm sure you'll be excited to hear about. So let me set the stage for our discussion today. Really, since project management documentation moved to the internet in the 1990s, we've been creating data as an industry, data that gets used after the project in various management, mapping, and modeling systems. But we've been creating it in a way and collecting it in a way that does not tag critical attributes or harness knowledge that could be extremely beneficial to the project owner. Asset-centric project management is a method that automates the collection and handoff of asset data in a way that makes it useful long after the project. Why does it matter? Well, studies by FIATEC demonstrated that owners pay between 2 to 4% of project cost, in the term they used was to recreate, collate, and retrieve data that they've already paid for. It's wasted hours. We refer to it as the project after the project. Contractors in the same way complete a project at the end of the project, and they spend up to 0.5% of project costs gathering this information, unfortunately, in a very unusable format for their owners. With today's technology, it's just unnecessary and owners are demanding more. So we've gathered an incredible panel to discuss the topic with you today. Let me begin to introduce them. Jim Ellis is the president of CURT, the Construction Users Roundtable. He's also a retired vice president of data center construction at Microsoft. Jim, tell us a little bit more about yourself and the mission of CURT and why today's topic is of interest to CURT members.
Sure. Thanks, Nicholas. Yeah, Jim Ellis, president of CURT, and about 40 years plus in the actual petrochemical side of delivering projects and operating assets, and then clearly a couple of years in hyperscaling data centers. So CURT actually is an organization that helps members kind of identify what are the best practices that need to be deployed, typically across the project process, right? From very early front-end development all the way through construction, commissioning, and more importantly now it's becoming apparent that there's got to be a greater attention placed on the asset. CURT members are struggling as they're data-rich owners, right? A lot of them are oil and gas and pharma, and typically the projects that get delivered are much more complex in nature for these owners and supply chain partners that basically are critical to them as well. And the systems and the equipment level data is quite interesting and quite relevant as it relates to operations. So the integrity and the quality of the project data that is transferred is critical to both enabling operations, and it's integral as well to project closing. You can't close the project if you don't have the right data sitting into the operations space. And that's not happening today. It's not happening well, and it varies relative to the quality and timeliness of the data transfer, and it's often impacting achieving a sustaining operating asset performance, and that ends up impacting customer. And customer is very, very important as they send the money at the end of the day to buy the products of these owners for Kurt. So very critical, Nicholas. Thanks for introducing me and for considering Kurt here in this webinar.
Well, Jim, we appreciate you being on with us today. That's an impactful answer, and I'm sure you're going to give us a lot more before the hour's over. Bert Altman leads the Project Management Information Systems practice at Procon Consulting. Bert, tell us a little bit more about yourself and about Procon.
Personally spent the last 20 plus years working at Procon and specifically with owner clients trying to solve the digital transformation of the design, construction, operations process for a lot of our owner clients. And Procon is a full service owner's rep and construction services firm. And many of our owners are asking us, for 10 or 15, 20 years ago, most of those owners were asking us to help them move into a digital transformation and transfer from paper, phones, fax machines to a more digital process for how they manage their projects. But what we're seeing now, most of our owner clients are really moving to try and consolidate some of the tools that they've purchased and move to a more integrated means of managing their project data and their operations data. And the room full of boxes, filing cabinets, and paper rolls has really been replaced with a digital version of kind of the same mess. So we're really looking at Procon for tools that can help us to provide more holistic and forward-thinking methods for managing that large set of data. And we see Kahua as a real leader in that area. And so, most of today's tools have really been focused on in the moment decision making and not really specifically for owner clients in gathering an organized, consistent set of data for project turnover. And so we really see that as something that is critical for the owners that we support. And we're really excited to talk about that today.
Bert, thank you for being with us today. I'm going to remember a digital version of the same mess. I'm going to use that over and over, I'm sure. Let me introduce Brian Ellsworth. Brian is the section head of construction management for the Mayo Clinic Health System in Minnesota. Brian, tell us a little bit more about yourself and about the work you do with the Mayo Clinic.
Yeah, thanks, Nicholas, and good afternoon. So yes, like Nicholas said, I'm a section head in facilities project services at Mayo Clinic. I've been with Mayo for 20 years, and for the last roughly 5 years, been leading the PMS implementation. Mayo Clinic is a nationwide health system with about 70,000 employees and 54 million square feet of built environment that we manage and occupy. Currently, we have about 200 active projects at any one time in our system, and really to best serve the patient, our healthcare facilities need to minimize disruptions as soon as they open. Well, project delivery is one component of the life of the project. Facilities management is more impactful to the impact of the patient. So getting the data from the project into an operational system is critical for safe and efficient operation of our hospitals, critical for optimizing patient care.
Brian, thank you for being with us today. We really are glad to have an owner like yourself on. Finally, I'll introduce Brian Moore. Brian is the president and founder of Kahua. He's been described as a serial entrepreneur, having also founded Constructware, the construction industry's very first internet-based PMIS, and Compliance 360, which served the healthcare industry. Brian, what else do you want us to know about yourself and about the work you're doing at Kahua?
Well, first off, glad to be here. Again, as Nicholas said, Brian Moore, president and co-founder of Kahua. This all started back in 1994. Scott Unger and I started a company called Constructor, as Nicholas mentioned, and it was the first internet project collaborative system in the marketplace. What's important about that is we took the industry from being a land-based system to being an internet-based system. So you'll hear me speak about this a lot in the presentation today. It's not just about the technology, it's about business processes, and it's also about change management. And we learned so much from that venture in Constructware over the years, which led us in 2009 to launch Kahua, again, from all of our learnings from the Constructware days. Why this conversation is so important to me and to Kahua? Well, what we've learned over the past several years is the fact that moving data and files throughout the life of an asset is still a major issue for all owners. And it's great to see in our travels at all the various conferences that so many vendors and the industry is focusing on this topic. And we, Kahua, are just excited to be part of this innovation.
Well, thank you, Brian, for that. And again, thank you for being with us as well. Let's get right into our conversation. I'm going to start with a question for Brian Ellsworth and for Jim. Gentlemen, Brian, we'll start with you. Just simply describe your experience with the project after the project. What's it like to gather, or what do you receive in the form of data, and how valuable is it to you? Brian, we'll start with you.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, first of all, we spend a lot of overhead, both from the project delivery side and the operational side. You know, we don't often get exactly what we need when we need it. You know, whether that's getting into industry partners to give us the information in a right format systematically. You know, it could be handing in a thumb drive that doesn't have files labeled correctly, a thumb drive that isn't encrypted, so it's not allowed to be used. Sometimes we're even still getting hard copies. So it's really, you know, the time that our delivery staff, our operational staff spend trying to get that information collected. You know, and then trying to get it into the appropriate databases, whether that's CAD and Revit, whether that's into our TMS system. It's really been a really a challenge for us, and it hasn't gone smoothly.
Jim?
So just maybe building on that, you know, we actually pay for this twice, Nicholas. And the reason I say that is good projects through integrated project delivery often has the operations team embedded very, very early on. And their job is to really help to manage the data that's supposed to go to the operations. The SOCs, the SOPs are very integral, right? So we pay for that through the life cycle as part of our net capital cost associated with delivering large mega projects. And then you find at the end, you know, that's been interesting, but it's all been based on data that's really not of quality that really can enable the operations. So the project after the project is to keeping that team together to just kind of get the data in a position where I can go and have my team be able to rely on what's been provided so that I can actually start up that facility safely, start up the facility in a way that I'm going to get to operating entitlement efficiently. And then clearly be able to add value to other stakeholders when I am operating the asset. Today, what I get is at the end of the project, I'm betting on I'm going to get a good BIM model that's going to be useful. It's not even relevant to the operations team, and they go forward utilizing, P&IDs that are 2D, and we end up having to rework a lot of that because it's not even in an as-built condition. So it's very inefficient, very costly, and clearly has an impact on delivering to stakeholder need.
Now, as construction guys, you probably don't know exactly this answer, so I'm just asking you to give somewhat of a guess or opinion, but for a hospital, for a data center, for a refinery, how long does it take to, as the term, retrieve, recreate, and collate that data into a database that your operations team can use? And again, if you don't know that answer, I understand you're on the construction side, but your operations folks are probably knocking on the door looking for that data. How long does it normally take before you've got a functional operational database?
Well, from a healthcare standpoint, it takes literally months of the operational side coming to my team on the project services side. Once again, overhead being spent on both sides. So months on a good project, years on maybe a normal project. So way too long to be really efficient in delivering that project and managing that facility.
Jim, I imagine a data center is a lot different from a refinery. What's your kind of estimate on that length of time it takes to get an operational database?
So it's about that same. It's in the order of months to get to the point where you have the data that you need to really run that data center in again, meeting expectations around safety and quality and cost efficiency. So I would say months, but in petchem, I've seen it go as long as a year, where the technical design basis was not transferred over correctly, and that extended and required a team to go into that operation and actually try to troubleshoot, and it took the better part of a year to get to operating entitlement. So it does have kind of impact, as we've discussed.
So Nicholas, I would just
thank you, gentlemen.
Nicholas, can I just add a comment to that? You know, I've given presentations.
Yeah, please.
I've given presentations to over 120 owners, and I think that we have representation from individuals here that are probably more state of the art. And if you look at the average owner out there, what the feedback that I'm getting is it can take between 1 to 2 years to operationally get set up. So I think that's important to understand, that for the average owner out there, it could take them substantially longer because they don't have the tools or mechanisms or resources to be able to stand up operations.
Well, Brian and Bert, both of you, I'll ask you both as the technology guys on this panel, do you see additional problems with the way that we gather and then pass on important asset data?
Well, I know, Nicholas, I've used this with you a few times. I make this kind of akin to the digital wind sprint. You know, you run 10 yards ahead and then go 5 yards backwards, gathering up all the stuff along the way, and then sprint 10 yards ahead. I'm a big guy. I don't like wind sprints. I hated that as the end of practice. But I'll give you two examples. You know, Procon as a service provider, we operate in a lot of those inefficiencies, and these are two real world examples where owner clients are paying us extra money to do things that most likely should have been or were already done by kind of other providers during that project. And the first is Sophisticated Campus, where they were delivering multiple projects all at once. And we had spoken to them about creating kind of a consolidated BIM model and GIS tool for them. And you know, we delivered that presentation, and we were really surprised at how quick they jumped on it as something they were really interested in, only to turn around and find out that they had just delivered a building and just completed brand new building, and they just signed up a new O&M contractor. The O&M contractor arrived, and within the first 3 weeks delivered them this massive change order that was larger than our original price for the services we were going to provide. And it was all equipment that had been delivered as a part of that project. And somehow it had not been translated over to the owner, and they weren't even fully aware or didn't have a complete and comprehensive equipment list when they turned that building over. And so all of a sudden the services we provided seemed cheap in comparison to kind of the lack of information that they had about a facility that they had just delivered, just been delivered to them. The other is we provide commissioning services, and one of the things that in every commissioning bid that we do is we put a fee in there somewhere in the range of 15 to as much as 30%, depending on the owner, and kind of our understanding, just to gather data, right? It's just to go out and look at all the various sources of that information, just so we can get it all in a workable manner for us to begin and deliver our commissioning consulting work that we do. Just because in both cases we're working with owners that have tools in place. It's just that those tools, the data is buried within those tools, or it's in multiple different sources. And so, we obviously, it's a good business model for us, but we certainly see where owners could save a massive amount of money just by organizing this data in a better way. So those are my kind of real world examples of, the abstract discussion that we're having right now.
You teed me up for the next question I wanted to ask you specifically. because as a software manager for a large AEC firm in the 1990s, when Brian was starting up Constructware, I was a software manager and bought a product called Revit 1.0. And I upgraded it once to Revit 2.0, and then Autodesk acquired Revit, and we know how that story ended, very favorably, actually. But at that time, the conversation began about the BIM model providing all the data we could ever imagine. It seems that we've made some progress using BIM. As you said, during construction, it's a wonderful tool. It helps with our techniques and with our challenges there. But it's been 25 plus years, and providing rich data from a model to the owner's operation still seems to be a bundle of potential rather than a reality. So I'll ask you, Bert, is BIM the answer? If yes, how come it hasn't happened? And if no, why not?
I think it is an answer. I think it is a tool that can be used. The problems or we had many of our owners begin specifying that they're going to receive BIM models, as much as 10 plus years ago. They quickly realized that just saying that we're going to get the BIM model is not enough. That the results that they got from the practitioners was too inconsistent. So they spent more time, more effort building out better and more complete set of requirements for what they're going to get. Even then, I would say that it is still something of a varying set of success. Those owners that have really invested internally and have like a robust infrastructure to support BIM, they've seen better results, but it's still not a comprehensive solution. On large projects, we've already kind of mentioned there's this big dash at the end of the project because the general contractor is not updating the BIM models. They are doing it through some combination of professional services from the AE or potentially from their construction manager, owner's rep, where they're gathering all that data up. But again, they're going out to all these different places to try and source that and pull it together. And then it gets delivered to operations. And a lot of times, again, to that, it becomes a digital doorstop instead of, written report or a roll of drawings like it used to be. But it's still, oftentimes it's not kept up to date. And then, as we've heard mentioned, those big projects are not all the projects that occur. There are tons of small projects where those small project practitioners don't have any experience. So that's where we see, tools like Kahua, especially this asset-centric approach, as an ability to kind of democratize and push that opportunity to gather up all of that asset data in a way that is more familiar and more palatable to the contractors and subcontractors and the other people that are performing work. They don't need to have experience, tools, staffing that to really get into the BIM model. They just need to input the data that is coming in, typically already via submittals, installation pictures of nameplates on equipment that they're installing, and putting all of that data into a structured way. So then if you have a robust investment in BIM, you can pull it back without having to go and source that from a million different places. If you don't have BIM or BIM's not available on that project, you can still get that data into your IWMS, your CMMS systems, or even just turn it over to your operational practitioners in a consistent and organized way. So I see it as a tool that really is a supporting mechanism for BIM infrastructure if you have one, and for those folks that don't, it replicates a lot of the function that is available with that you would this promise that has been made from BIM without necessarily having to make that same level of investment.
Bert, you're a guy that through ProCon, you live and breathe this every day with your owner clients. So thank you for your perspective. I'll turn back to Jim and to Brian Ellsworth. You guys have represented some major construction owners, including Exxon and Microsoft and Mayo. Have these organizations been able to effectively use BIM in managing asset information after construction?
So maybe I'm happy to start here. I think it's limited at best, Nicholas. I think it was described quite well. I mean, what we need is operating data, maintenance data, obviously data to run and maintain CapEx, data to do the accounting, and And certainly that's critical to have in one place for operations. You're not going to get that from the BIM model, but certainly you want the digital threads coming out of the project, all the digital threads that feed into what's needed to feed into those spaces that are important for us to run the asset and operate it efficiently and safely. I would say the other piece that I build on here is that there's thinking now going on that if we did have a BIM model, we did have the integration of all the data coming in, all the data threads fit into a model like Kahua is proposing here to really enable us to have a digital model of that asset. And then we run that digital model over that life cycle. We believe, and many of our owners and Kurt believe, that that's kind of the key to the future as we think about replicating assets, digital twins, design one, engineer one, and then build many. Data centers clearly apply in that space, and there's a lot of thinking going on. So there's a lot of, I think, focus right now on making sure that these digital threads come all together. The BIM model is one piece of that, but all of the rest of the information is also critical to feed into that if we're ever going to be able to have a live digital thread over the lifecycle asset and then transfer that information into building the next asset that is on the docket for being built.
Yeah, and I think I can add to what Jim said. The short answer, Nicholas, to your question is no, we have not been effective in using BIM to manage asset information. A lot of times because that asset information isn't necessarily specifically intended to go into other databases such as the Office of Information Security and the DataJacks that are there, the bed management system, used outside of facilities, those type of systems that we don't have a good way to get the data from the BIM model. Frankly, at the end of the day, we're using the PDF forms. We're using those pieces of paper to go maintain that facility, and we don't have a good way to get that information from our assets into our other systems.
So, Brian, what is the important data that you as a healthcare owner need in those systems? What kind of data is it that you're looking for that was collected during design and construction phases?
Well, the first one that is asked for is room numbers and floor plans, so that our delivery system, our procurement system, our wayfinding system can be updated, for that patient experience. We need the CAD and Revit database to update our database of the built environment. And then after that, I would say it falls to operation and maintenance manual information, asset tag information, warranty information, and the relative dates. I mean, those are the highly critical data that we need really just to do the day-to-day operation.
All right, excellent. Brian Moore, in your conversations, you said that you've presented this, what was first a topic, a methodology idea, and it's now actually a product that you've productized. In your conversation with all those owners, 120 plus, what else do you see as important in the process here?
Yeah, as I mentioned when I kicked it off, the one thing we learned about during our Constructor days going from land to internet, it's not just about the technology. It's about how do you bring about everybody in this change process. And I think what's critical here is, we have created a process here that we call the Asset Centric Playbook, because it's not just about the technology. The owner needs to define what do they need in order to be successful for the next 30 years. And once they define what they need from those assets, it's critical to have a workshop with all the various constituents, both internally and externally, and basically define the obligations of all the players. Everybody needs to understand what role they play, what information that they need to collect, and at what point in time. More importantly, what we do as part of this asset-centric specification is we work to understand the value proposition to all the constituents and all the players. I think the one thing that's very exciting is all the way from the subcontractor, general contractor, architect, CM firm, and the owner, there's an enormous opportunity for us here to change how the construction process works and save an enormous amount of time and money. So the end result of this asset workshop is this asset specification. It becomes a playbook for the teams on how they'll manage that project. The exciting thing is if you follow the playbook, again, for what the owner needs in order to be successful for the next 30 to 40 years, what the owner gets at the end is basically all the data that they need in order to be successful. More importantly, they need to be able to audit as they go along to ensure that they get what is specified. So if the owner repeats this process project after project, hopefully as an organization, they now become highly digitally proficient. So it's not just about getting the building done or getting the project done. It's also about creating a portfolio of information around all of our assets. And if an owner is able to create a portfolio of information around all their assets, then they're able to start doing analytics across all those assets, which should lead to better decisions in the future, different outcomes, lower risk.
Bert, you'd be a consulting arm through Procon that would participate in this kind of upfront activity, guiding an owner client through this methodology. Would you add anything to what Brian just said? Anything else that you'd want to add to that?
No, I mean, I think it's critical that you really understand the current state and have a comprehensive look at, because most of these owners have made massive investments in the current state of their enterprise in terms of their tools, and really understand those tools and what those tools are providing and where there are gaps, and doing a survey of existing set of data and how it is, where it is falling short, and then taking and trying to find a way through either their existing tools, through Kahua, through other methodology, how do you fill those gaps and who's responsible for keeping that up to date? I would say the other critical piece of this is ensuring that you're also updating your contract documents, Division 1 specification, other things, and that's certainly something we would help the teams with, so that you're setting us and contractual kind of requirement for all of the participants to and setting what is expected of them. And to Brian's point, you also have a feedback mechanism for easily determining where those contractors maybe are falling short and how you can deal with that. So, and also where you're falling short internally. So I think all of that would be a part of the process of, building out that playbook, building the taxonomy, determining all of the critical pieces of information, but also looking at all the people and processes that feed into that, and trying to make sure that you close the gaps on that, to make sure that at the end of the day, the owner gets something that is really, truly going to be useful to them, not just another tool, not another tool that they have to manage, but something that is really going to provide solutions.
Excellent. Brian Moore, I thought it would be helpful if you could walk us through what this actually looks like to an end user on a normal project, processing a normal daily activity. So we've brought on a short video clip. Could you talk us through what this process actually looks like?
Absolutely. Well, first off, let me begin here with this slide to give you an overview of the offering. There's 4 components that we built as part of this Asset Centric Project Management. And it really begins with the asset being in the middle. It's the lowest common denominator in which we're able to easily fit information to other systems internally and to downstream stakeholders. If we start in the top left quadrant there, we have the ability for the owner to be able to identify the assets that they want to track, because again, every single owner is going to be unique in identifying the assets and the attributes that they want to be able to track. In addition, they have the ability to digitally manage that whole process, so they can see the status of where all that information is at any point in time during construction. In addition, in the bottom left quadrant, we've built out the capability to be able to link any documents or files to an asset. And this is a key point that wasn't raised before. We have been focused so much on all the information that gets transferred over to the owner. But FMI did a study in which 95% of the data that is created in design and construction never gets utilized again. So this is a great opportunity if there happens to be an issue or a punch list or a change order or a design review that's associated with an asset, you can now link that document, you can now link a file to that asset. In doing so, what we're doing here is we're starting to create an asset data repository. By having this asset data repository, we're able to start doing analytics, not just for the project, but for the portfolio of assets that the owner has. So the intent and purpose here is helping the owner make better decisions around those assets that they're utilizing continuously across their whole portfolio. In the bottom right-hand corner is we provide the ability, given the fact that everything now in the project world, right, in design and construction, is now associated to an asset, it becomes very easy for us to be able to integrate to CMMS systems, to the model itself, or to Esri. And more importantly, with CMMS, as work orders are done on an asset, we're able to bring that information back into our asset data repository. So what we're able to provide for the owner is just not a picture of what's happening during design and construction, but provide a picture from design for the next 30 to 40 years. So it gives them a good indication on how those assets are performing. If we go from here, what you're seeing here is the ability for the general contractor to be able to see real time, because again, all this is happening digitally within Kahua, but to be able to see real time, where do we stand in terms of collecting all this information? So you can see the item that is highlighted there, how many attributes have been collected out of the total, what percent. You can also see that we don't have the O&M manual or the cut sheet. And you can also see that there are 12 documents that have been attached to that asset. So this is very valuable information for the general contractor to be able to work with the subcontractors and make sure that they're getting the appropriate information based upon the phase of the project. More importantly, this information is very valuable to the owner. The owner can utilize this information from a pay application perspective, and this is where we can change behaviors going forward in the future. If you receive a pay application to approve, the assets may be installed, but as an owner, if you haven't received 100% of the data or files associated with that, you can hold up payment until you receive all the information. What's critical here is we started talking off about in the presentation how it could take months or even up to a year to get set up. You can see with this format that if we're receiving this information digitally within Kahua, we should not have to wait till the end of the project to digitally hand over all the information. But as assets are 100% complete, we should be able to pass that information on to the owner, to the CMMS system, so that they can start putting together their plan. So what happens next, now that you have all this information? I think this is where it gets extremely exciting. Again, we talked up front how this industry creates an enormous amount of data, an enormous amount of documents, but we go from one project to the next. By having this concept of an asset-centric overlay to all the documents into the files, what the owner gets at the end of the project then is the asset in the middle. And now they can start doing analysis with respect to cost, to risk, to schedule, to design associated with that asset. And as time goes on, the owner starts building information around their portfolio around an asset type, which should lead to an owner making better decisions. The one thing that I always say when I came in this industry in 1994 is almost every conference I went to is they stated that the majority of capital projects were over budget and late. Last year in 2022, the same thing was there. Majority of capital projects are over budget and late. So we didn't learn that much from all the data for the last several decades. And I think this different lens, this different perspective of having everything around the asset is going to provide the information for an owner for them to be able to make better decisions in the future. And that's the objective here. It's putting the owner in a better position to understand their portfolio, understand the assets, which ones are working, which ones aren't working, and help them make different decisions based upon this information. So I think I'm going to show you just a real quick high-level video of the offering. What you're seeing here, this could be any business process. This just happens to be a punch list. We're pinning a drawing. And I'm able to go up there. You see that tag. and I'm basically tagging that document to an asset. Now that asset is linked to the document, as you can see up top there. This can happen to any other business process. It could be a design review. Again, it could be a punch list. It could be an RFI. It could be an issue. It could be a change order. Now, if we were to go to the submittal process, you can see here, we've already have the asset tagged to the submittal. Now we want to be able to link either the warranty or the O&M manual to that submittal item. So now I just click on add. I'm able to add the document and identify that this document is a warranty. And then basically now that warranty is associated to that asset. So as we're creating all this information and content with business processes that we've always used, now you can see under the types and the assets here, in this case, we're in the types, we're creating this repository of information. You can see here that all the attributes have already been filled in for this asset type. And you can see that the O&M manual and the warranty certificate have already been put into place. Now, if we go to the specific instance of that asset, you can go to that asset and see that we've already got the install date, we got the serial number, we had the subcontractor take a photo, and down below you can see that there were 5 documents that were created that were associated to this asset. So that's a real quick, high-level overview of how some of these applications, you're able to quickly, as you're just doing your work today, tag your documents to the various assets.
Brian, you said these are processes we've always used. So that's the thing I take away from this. There's no new chore that a designer or constructor has to do. These are things that we're already doing every day on a construction project.
Yeah, that's a very important point, Nicholas, and thank you for bringing that up. Because again, as mentioned up front, if you think about all the constituents, more than likely at the end of the process, the general contractor is sending an Excel spreadsheet out to many subcontractors, and most of those subcontractors are already off the project, and you're trying to collate all that information back. And then we have to spend all this time to hand that information over to the owner, and then they have to spend all that time getting that information into their system. And what I just demonstrated to you is just by creating your business processes, just as you're doing your submittal, just as you're doing your RFI or your pay application, it's literally just one additional click in which you're tagging that document to an asset. As you're doing your work, as you're doing it throughout the life of the project, you're creating that repository of asset information that now can be digitally handed over to the owner.
So Jim Ellis, Brian Ellsworth, would this provide the kind of value that your organizations want and need? Brian, we'll start with you.
The short answer is for sure. You know, things that both Brian and Bert said as I was listening, like, I want my staff to move on to the next project. I want them to be ready to deliver the next project so they can put the old one behind them, right? So it for sure would provide value for what we want, what we need, a systematic way to get that predetermined information, to automate it would be a huge value to us as an owner.
Jim, you represent so many different companies with your, as president of the Construction Users Roundtable. What are your thoughts on this?
So yes, absolutely essential, right? Industry desperately needs this, and it's going to be importantly that we have strategies that rapidly embrace this. We got to build awareness, build value. Clearly, you know, when I go back to what we're going to spend over the next 10 years, which is upwards of $20 trillion across the globe, right, according to McKinsey, and projects are continuing to fail. And then we talked already about, you know, the cycle time to operating entitlement. None of that is really adding shareholder value. So I think if you go to Kurt members and you build a business case and says, here's how we create shareholder value. Today they're creating, receiving, managing, and you know, the volume of information related to the management of these physical assets is going to be essential because, you know, we're pressured on cost, we're pressured on schedule, and we don't have solutions to get there faster. I think if we get data in the right place and we start managing these different sets of assets related information across the organization, that we are going to lead towards a digital twin strategy that's going to create some of those efficiencies that are going to enable the value for shareholders. So clearly, I see a lot of value in this, and I know Kurt members will as well.
Thank you, Jim. Brian Moore, I'm going to turn back to you and just ask almost a summary question. It's been your mission to bring this topic to the industry. In your conversation with owners and program managers and contractors alike, what else have you learned, or what else are we missing in this conversation?
Yeah, great question, Nicholas. I think the one thing that has stood out for me is the focus for so many years has been just the handoff between construction and the O&M team. And every time I've gone out this past year and given this presentation, and as mentioned, I've done it well over 120 times, it's usually with the construction team. And the next presentation is usually with about 5 or 6 different people in the room. And they're usually bringing people in from finance, from compliance, from security, from insurance. And I think that's the thing that's been amazing to me is there's actually a process after the process. I mean, once O&M team gets all their information, there's so many other constituents, other stakeholders in the process that need all the data about that asset to do their job for the next 30 to 40 years. I mean, a simple example is just around security. If it takes 9 months to a year for the security person to get the information associated with an asset, how many patches has that security person missed during that time frame? What's the risk associated with that? And the same is true with all the other constituents. Each one has a specific need. And this is why it's really important when you're creating that asset-centric playbook is that you involve all these constituents. Because when you sit down with those constituents in the room, all you have to do is just be quiet and listen. They will sit there and tell you about all the problems that they have every single day. And again, this is where I think there's just an enormous opportunity. It's not just we talked about up front around the FIATEC 2 to 4% of the cost of the project to do the handover. It's about what is the cost for an owner to understand their portfolio for the next 30 to 40 years. And the other component I would say, I think you had, what's missing, and given the fact that I mentioned all those other constituents, I would think from an outside perspective, I think it would probably be very beneficial to engage with insurance companies. Insurance companies have an enormous amount of knowledge around claims, around what's probably the best next thing to do to an asset in order to extend its life another year, another 2 years. So I think as we go on this journey around this asset-centric project management, it would behoove us as we go forward is to try to bring even some external constituents to help us in the process.
All right, excellent. This has been fantastic. We've got a little time for some questions for the audience. Actually, we've got about 10 minutes, so I'm gonna turn to some questions from our audience. And the first one is going to go to Jim Ellis, and the question was very simply, who can become a member of CURT?
So first of all, thanks for having CURT at this webinar. We really appreciate it. And CURT has been rather instrumental in the driving force behind a lot of continuous and significant improvement throughout the construction industry, right? And it's used some unparalleled resources. There's great networking opportunities. Construction owners, obviously, owners of assets can be part of CURT. Association members, we have various different associations, including the unions, are part of the CURT organization as well. And then associate members, which are all the integral part of our supply chain partnerships that have to go on for having successful projects. So pretty much anyone can join. Happy to share more information. Just reach out to me.
And we can find more information online if we wanted to at curt.org. Is that right?
That's correct. curt.org.
All right. Here's a question for the panel. This could go to anyone. Actually, we'll start here. I'm gonna start with a question from Carmelo, and we'll give this to Brian Moore. Does your asset handover solution integrate with other asset management CMMS systems? Does this replace the other systems or supplement?
So it can be all the above. We actually have a partner that has built a CMMS solution on top of Kahua's platform. But for majority of the customers that exist out there, they will already have a CMMS system in place. So we would integrate with the existing CMMS system. And again, I think that's what the key value proposition here of having everything structured in the lowest common denominator, which is the asset, it is very easily consumable by Esri, by the model, or by the CMMS system. So we're able to push the location, we're able to push the asset information over to the CMMS system. As I mentioned before, it is also very important for us to be able to feed back as work orders are done on an asset back to the asset data repository. So we're actually doing integration both ways with respect to the CMMS system.
And I would add to that,
Brian,
that you guys.
Go ahead, Bert.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that because I also saw it come up as a question. You guys are using already existing industry standards like COBE and those taxonomies as a core component so that you can standardize handoff between those different tool sets, right?
Yes.
Okay, next question to our panel. I'm sorry, was there more, Brian?
No, go ahead.
Next question to our panel. What if I have projects of very different types? I represent a university. We build housing, sports facilities, utility plants, laboratories, and even roads. Does this work the same for all those projects? And I guess we'll give that to Brian Moore to answer.
Yeah, one of the things that, again, I didn't go in depth in terms of all the components of the offering, but basically we have an asset management setup so that, again, you as an owner can define what are the assets that are critical to you, what are the attributes that you want to collect associated with those assets. But then more importantly, what you're able to do is you're able to start creating templates so that, again, probably by specific vertical or owner type, you may have 3 or 4 templates that you can create. So that when you start a new project, you basically can select a template. The content is already in place. And if you need to, you can modify. If you needed to add an asset or remove some attributes, you can do that once you've copied that template over to the project.
All right, thank you for that answer. I'm going to come back to you, Brian. Gabe writes, they've just obtained Kahua as an asset systems development manager. I'm looking at GIS as the common data environment for my digital twin. Does Kahua play with Esri?
So Kahua does have a partner that will be doing the integration between our Asset Centric Project Management and Esri. So the answer is yes. The one thing to understand here is these integrations are very similar to integrations from an accounting perspective. You may have a lot of different accounting systems out there in the marketplace, but Kahua is an expert based upon how we build out our cost management, being able to replicate the logic and the rules on our side to easily integrate with any other system. That's the same concept of what we built here with the asset-centric approach. Because we have it in the lowest common denominator and everything is associated to that asset, so again, any documents or files associated with that asset, it becomes easy for us to have an identifier that we can integrate with its Esri, whether it's CMMS or it's the model.
All right, we've got a couple questions that have come in specifically about Procore and what they provide and about Procore as a comparison to Kahua. So I'm going to pause here and just say we try not to make these webinars commercials for Kahua. We try to bring value to the industry. Our mission is to enable the industry to innovate. And today we, think of that as it's our way of helping you improve. And that's what this conversation is about. So we're glad to answer those side-by-side comparisons offline. But I will say that no matter who your PMIS vendor is, you should demand that they be able to help your asset owner, your operations team, provide this same value. That's what we're trying to demonstrate. We think it's overdue. I think you've heard from our owners on the panel that there is consensus that this is overdue. So it's something that owners are beginning to demand of us. If you don't use Kahua, demand it of your vendor as well.
Yeah.
All right,
Nicholas,
let's go to another question.
Nicholas, I think you stated that.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, I think you stated that very well. I mean, the only thing that I would add is the fact that we saw this again in the early, 1990s when we took the internet from land to the internet. And I think what's exciting, as I mentioned up front, is all vendors, and we're seeing it from all owners, this concept of trying to solve this problem is becoming very critical. We've lived for just so many decades in silos, and we continue to get the same results. So I think it's just exciting that all players, all vendors continue to have this discussion, and we try to find a resolution of going from land to internet and now going from project management to asset-centric project management.
Excellent. Okay, final question. Who owns the data that we speak of? Where does it reside? And let's see, it says, who owns the data you're discussing today? Where does it reside? What are the controls? So Brian, we'll give that question to you as well.
Well, I think that the key thing here is, again, not to get into specifics, but Kahua does have a solution that works for an owner. We have a Kahua for a general contractor and a Kahua for a subcontractor, in which each party can own their own system, their business processes, and their data. It's always very critical that each party is able to leave the project with their project record. But specifically with respect to the asset-centric information, it is critical that the owner owns all the data in the end. If the owner doesn't own the data at the end, they're not going to be able to do analytics across their portfolio. And if not able to do analytics, they're not going to be able to make the continuous improvement opportunities necessary to make their next project their best project. And I think that's so critical. I think we're on the cusp of dramatically changing how the industry works with this asset-centric approach. And we should be able to approach any owner, and they should be able to do analytics across their whole portfolio and make different decisions based upon that information, which is driving to them having a better understanding and being able to acknowledge that their next project will be their best project.
And that's the best question that I've heard asked in the last year. It's a question we love to ask our owners. Can you say emphatically that your next project will be your best project? And if you can't, why not? If we learn from our lessons from the past, why don't we put them to use? Why can't we say that our next project is going to be, without doubt, our best project? And we'll make that our final thought. I'm going to thank my panelists. Thank you, Brian and Jim and Bert. Really appreciate your time today. I think this was an incredible conversation. If your question was not answered in the chat session, we will get back to you offline.